Excuse me.
We are live.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sage Turner, Chair of the Housing and Community Development Committee. I'd like to welcome you to the September 17th, 2024 remote meeting. All council members and staff are participating virtually. For those of you out there with us today, welcome and good morning. To help us follow along, I will state each section of the agenda aloud as we proceed. We're streaming live on our virtual engagement hub that's accessible through the hub link on the front page of the city's website. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone. You can do so by calling 855-925-2801 and using the meeting code 9791. You also have the option to call in and comment live during the meeting. To do so, you use the same number, 855-925-2801 and meeting code 9791. But at that point, you'll need to push *3 to be entered into the speaker queue. I'm going to do a quick roll call. Councilors and staff, if you could come off mute and say a quick hello when I call your name. Councilwoman Antoinette Mosley.
Good morning.
Good morning. Councilwoman Shanika Smith will not be with us this morning. Assistant City Manager Rachel Wood.
Good morning.
Homeless Strategy Division Manager Emily Ball.
Hey, good morning.
Community and Economic Development Director Nikki Reed.
Good morning.
Affordable Housing Officer Sasha Bertinsky.
Good morning.
And Affordable Housing Specialist Alex Ruiz. You here with us?
Good morning.
Good morning. Okay. All right. That is everyone. Did I miss anybody? No. Okay. We're going to jump right to the agenda. The first item of business is the approval of minutes from August 20th. Councilwoman Mosley, any changes or motion?
I move that the minute meetings be accepted as presented.
I'll second. And because we're virtual, we do a roll call vote. So Councilwoman Mosley?
Aye.
Myself, aye, and the minutes have passed. So quickly moving on to item number 2, which we'll hear from Emily Ball. It's a quarterly update from the Continuum of Care. Take it away, Emily.
All right, good morning again. Glad to be here to talk to you about the Continuum of Care. We have a lot going on, and there are a lot of good updates to share with you. First, an overarching key takeaway is that the COC is very busy. We've been very busy the last couple of months. That number actually is now 368 COC members, so folks are continuing to join. We expect that to continue to grow over time. The Continuum of Care build out is continuing, and I'm going to talk quite a bit about that this morning. With committees and work groups being established and appointed, there are 5 remaining board seats to be elected in October. And the Continuum of Care is busy with planning work on Code Purple and emergency shelter expansion. We'll complete a 3-year strategic plan in November, and our annual federal funding processes are happening this summer and fall. So first, talking about the COC build out as that continues to get fully established over time. The Continuum of Care charter identifies 5 standing committees, and it also details process to create and appoint other committees and work groups as needed, as directed by the board. So the first committee appointed was the funding committee, appointed in May. You all have seen that before. At their August meeting, the board appointed the nominating and membership committee, and you can see on the chart there who has been appointed to that group. So good balanced representation from folks across the Continuum of Care membership. That committee is really critical in facilitating the process to get folks in seats at the table on the board and on the remaining committees and work groups. The coordinated entry work group was appointed last week at the COC board meeting. And that group will work with HUD technical assistance on a year-long project to redesign the coordinated entry system. In our community, I would say we don't actually have a coordinated entry system. We have a lot of activity happening to try to get people connected to services, but that activity isn't fully streamlined and really integrated so that we have a seamless system in place that is possible for a COC. So we had submitted a request to HUD for technical assistance to fully redesign the way that people are able to access services, to be sure that access is improved and that it's not as dependent on the person to find the right resource for themselves, but we're better able to connect people with the care that they need. So that technical assistance request was approved. That project will begin next week with a kickoff from the TA team And this work group that was appointed last week will work closely with that TA team on developing the full redesign plan that will, of course, come back to the board for approval. The nominating and membership committee that's just been appointed will participate in training tomorrow with our HUD technical assistance provider, and then they will lead the process to elect the remaining 5 board members, and then appoint their remaining 3 committees and any new committees and work groups that are established. So the other committees identified in the charter as standing that will be appointed in the coming months are community relations, system performance, and system planning and implementation. Board applications are open right now to any COC member. Applications are due at the end of this week and then will be elected by the board and the COC membership at their meetings on October 16th. And you can see the specific board seats that are open right now. And then lastly, as we think about building out the COC, we had applied for a Dogwood Health Trust grant for continuum of care development to support contracted services as needed for things like strategic planning, training for committee chairs, support for building out a framework around engaging and supporting folks with lived experience and participating in the continuum of care. Those are some examples, but that grant was awarded, and that's $95,000 to support implementation of the continuum of care design build out. So we as the lead agency will manage those funds, but the COC board will direct best use of those. That hasn't yet begun, but that was some good news and a good resource available to the COC board. COC is also doing planning activities related to shelter. So the shelter planning work group had issued a request for proposals for low barrier shelter earlier this summer. They received 3 proposals through that process, and they did recommend all 3 for advancement. So that is Haywood Street for 25 total beds, not 25 new beds, but will be 25 total beds. So adding 13 to the 12 that they have right now. Safe Shelter for 25 beds, so adding 5 to the 20 that they have right now, and anchoring them at Trinity United Methodist Church. And then Salvation Army to maintain the 65 beds that they currently have in their downtown shelter. So the work group brought forward a proposal to the Continuum of Care Board in August, and that proposal was approved for the beds that you see there, meaning that funding request is now advanced to Buncombe County for consideration. That is $3.65 million, and Buncombe County commissioners will consider that request from ARPA funding. That covers capital costs for some of those projects, as well as a year of operations for each of them. And county commissioners will consider that at their meeting this evening. And then the shelter planning work group will continue to work to identify unmet shelter needs and develop plans and capacity in response. Certainly the additional beds that would come online if funded through this process are not sufficient to meet the full need that we have in the community. So that shelter planning work group will continue to pursue additional plans. We have also been working on Code Purple planning, and at present, what we are looking at is a similar plan and similar capacity to last year, with ABCCM as the Code Purple shelter provider at the Veterans Restoration Quarters for men. That's 90 beds for men. And then at Transformation Village with 35 beds for women or women with children. The city and county had each budgeted $50,000 to support Code Purple. And so we issued a funding request to the COC, had requests reviewed by the funding committee and then brought to the COC board for consideration. And last week, the board did approve the funding committee's recommendation to award that full $100,000 to ABCCM for their shelter operation for Code Purple. And then lastly, on planning, the board will participate in strategic planning November 12th and 14th. That will be really helpful for us. Of course, those strategic plans are helpful. That'll be facilitated by our HUD technical assistance provider, and we'll have some pre-work involved so that the membership can participate in helping the board understand what is most important to the members. We'll be doing a survey to the membership and some activity during the October meeting in advance of that November strategic planning. That'll be a 3-year strategic plan with annual action plans. It is also our annual federal funding season for continuum of care funding. So there are two primary federal funding processes for COCs that happen in the summer and the fall every year. The first is the Emergency Solutions Grant, or ESG. That is federal funding that comes to the state for management. So that's North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. And then the other is the Continuum of Care Program, which is HUD funding at the federal level. The standard process for both of these is that the funder issues notice to the COC with details that includes the funding amount and the timeline. And then we, as the lead agency, establish that local review timeline, publish the opportunity out to the COC membership. Any COC member organization is eligible to apply. And then those applications come to us as lead agency. We compile that for the Continuum of Care Funding Committee to review, often score, and then develop recommendations to the COC board. COC board has final approval of the applications and the amounts that we will then submit on their behalf to the funder. So we submit based specifically on board approval. And then the funder reviews, makes final decisions, and contracts directly with the funded agency. So this is our process for both ESG and COC, but is also really a roadmap for how any funding can come through the continuum of care for best decision-making with strategic implementation. The Emergency Solutions Grant, eligible activities for that are street outreach, emergency shelter, homelessness prevention, rapid rehousing, and HMIS or an HMIS comparable database. Any victim service provider, so a domestic violence provider, for example, is not able to participate in the HMIS by federal design for client confidentiality. So they are able to use an HMIS comparable database to collect that same information. The total available to our COC from ESG funding this year is $123,000. We have submitted that application based on board approval August 17th, and we expect notification in October. And then awards will occur over the grant period of calendar year 25. So you can see there that the city of Asheville is included for about $4,800 for an HMIS project that is specifically to help cover the vendor costs for the HMIS for the community. And then other costs there are helpmate and homeward bound.
Hey, Emily,
Mhm.
any luck getting, we had one vendor, was it Western Ministries, that didn't use HMIS? And any luck with any of these other options, getting them on board? There's no patch or comparable database used for them?
That's right. So the rescue mission had previously used a different software product from the same developer, and there was a patch possibility that we explored, but the product they had been using was sunsetting and not going to be supported by that software developer anymore. So we couldn't access that patch. And they have transitioned to a new software product earlier this year and wanted some time to really get up and running with that database before
But it
we
will
use
eventually, it will work though, eventually?
I
They
don't know
Okay.
yet.
Okay.
Yet it
Fingers
still
crossed.
really is a very significant project to transition a database. And so Charles on our team, who manages the HMIS, met with their data person to explore that and agreed to kind of revisit that after they had some months up and running in that new database.
Oh, I'll be hopeful. Thanks.
So our big pot of federal funding for homeless programs is the Continuum of Care program. And you can see the eligible activities there. So this is really housing oriented funding. The total available to our community this year is just under 2.5 million. And those project applications are due locally this Friday. Funding committee will review, will make recommendations to the COC board for approval, and then staff will submit based on the COC board vote by the HUD deadline of October 30th. HUD will review, make final awards, and then contract with funded agencies. And then lastly on funding, HUD has recently issued a one-time notice of funding opportunity for capital funding for permanent supportive housing development. It's called COC Build, so just kind of a one-off funding process. Each COC can submit one application only, and there are only 25 awards available nationally, but over 400 COCs, so highly competitive funding. We published an opportunity to submit a letter of intent locally to understand whether we had a provider who was ready to pursue this funding opportunity with a project, and Safe Shelter did respond to that. We actually had a meeting with them yesterday, and they are not going to continue to pursue that particular application. They just need more time on their plans to really get that sort of fully put together before they're ready to submit a complex capital funding application. Lastly, on a continuum of care, there you will see a few requested council action items related to continuum of care activities. The first two are related to our role as lead agency, so a budget amendment to accept that Dogwood Health Trust grant of $95,000, and then authorization for us to submit the project applications for the COC competition that the city manages. That's the planning grant, that's admin money for us as lead agency, and then the HMIS grant that covers that vendor cost. You'll also see an interlocal agreement with Buncombe County to accept and manage ARPA funds if those are approved tonight for Salvation Army in particular, as an extension of their original agreement where the city has been managing that joint city and county ARPA funding for Salvation Army, and then Code Purple contract authorization. And then in November, you will see a request to consider dissolution of the Homeless Initiative Advisory Committee in order to direct all homelessness response through the continuum of care. That was a recommendation from HIAC directly, and that'll be on your agenda for consideration. So again, key takeaways, we are busy. We got a lot going on, got a lot of folks doing a lot of work. I think we have good momentum, really good community participation, and it's going well. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Emily. That's exciting about the one-time build. I wonder if that's like a pilot of sorts, that more funding like that may happen in the future. A, for HUD, for just even recognizing that there's a bigger need for this kind of thing. That's exciting. Yeah, thanks for your work on this. Councilwoman Mosley, any questions?
No, thanks.
Okay, well, we appreciate the update, and that concludes item number 2 on our agenda. We're moving on to item number 3, hot topic of the month, housing development at 148 River Ford Parkway, formerly known as Ramada. Here, there's a big update. Go ahead.
Great. All right, Ramada. So Friendship for Affordable Housing, as you know, is a private affordable housing developer. They are under contract to purchase that property, under contract with Stormfield Capital to purchase the property at 148 River Ford Parkway, and they are anticipated to close on October 1st. They had originally submitted a proposal to the city requesting $1.5 million in funding for multi-year services to create 50 permanent supportive housing units as part of the project. But based on the feedback they heard from the continuum of care, from you all at your last meeting, and from the community, they have reconfigured that project plan and are now seeking to provide 50 units of affordable housing at 50% AMI, along with 50 units of permanent supportive housing for veterans. In order to accomplish that project plan, they are requesting a modification of the city's current deed restriction from 100 units of supportive housing to 50 units of supportive housing, and then 50 units of affordable housing, but are no longer requesting any city funds in order to develop the units. So I will walk through the basics of this reconfigured project, and then Friendship is with us on the call, so I'll turn it over to them so they can answer your questions directly. So again, they had originally submitted a proposal to the city requesting $1.5 million in funds for multi-year services from Homeward Bound to create 50 permanent supportive housing units as part of the project. 50 additional units are slated for permanent supportive housing for veterans with services provided by the VA Medical Center through the HUD-VASH program. And then 13 additional units are slated for affordable housing open to the public, but would not have subsidy attached and would not have services attached. Go ahead.
I'm not sure what that means without subsidy. What does that mean without vouchers? They're just going to have open below market rental units.
Yep, exactly right.
And what's the plan? I understand this particular property is really two separate deeded properties. What's the plan for the non-restricted portion?
So everything that is in front of us now is only for the portion of the property that has the two existing buildings. And then the other property is that vacant parcel immediately adjacent. As I understand it, there's not yet a plan for development on that property. They are focusing on the property with the two buildings for the first phase, and then would look to develop that second parcel down the road. They can certainly speak to that further.
Any reason why the 13 are not just voucher accepting units, or, I mean, is this related back to Monique and the project-based vouchers, or why not just do 63?
As I understand it, in the original project proposal several years ago, the arrangement with the Housing Authority at the time was to be able to access 100 project-based vouchers, 50 of which would be veteran dedicated. Those other 13 units certainly could accept a tenant-based voucher.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Okay, so they could still be tenant-based.
Mhm.
All right, so they're not necessarily just open, anybody could rent an apartment, they may also accept vouchers. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'd say would definitely accept vouchers for those 13. It's just that those 13 would not have a project-based voucher attached to the unit.
Maybe this is a good time to ask my project-based voucher question. I'd love to know, so for those listening in, you've got tenant-based vouchers that move with the individual and project-based vouchers that stay with the project. That's the gist. But who gets the project-based vouchers?
So
know.
project-based vouchers would be specific to people at or below 50% of area median income. And my understanding from the CSE board discussion, which Monique, of course, is on the board and so was part of that discussion last week, that there would be a dedicated wait list for the properties. So folks would apply as usual through the Housing Authority process in order to be added to that wait list specific to this project.
So it's not folks on the current waiting list. It's like a whole new list that is just for this project. And is there a reason why we wouldn't? I mean, I understand there's a long wait list of folks holding vouchers that don't have units. Is there a reason why they wouldn't get first queue? Oh, Antoinette, do you know? Go ahead.
So a couple of things at once. I thought my very first question was about whether the 13 were going to be subsidized. So in that, a voucher would be a subsidy technically. So that's why I was like, is it just open to everyone? So it seems like the answer is actually they would accept tenant-based vouchers, right? Okay.
Yeah, would accept but would not require. So could just be a direct pay from an individual.
So not shall, but may. Secondly, the waiting list for the Housing Authority just reopened
Oh,
a
wow.
few weeks ago. I don't know how many are left, but there could be two different wait lists. Or I'm wondering, will the developer have the right to choose who it places in those units? Like, will they have a property management company that chooses? Or are you saying the Housing Authority can choose? So if you go on the wait list, you say you put which developments you're interested in.
Okay.
And then if a place comes up, they can go, oh, this one is available. And then of course the potential tenant may or may not accept it. Is that the process that will be undertaken in this instance, Emily?
It's similar, but my understanding is that you would specifically be on a wait list for this property as opposed to a wait list for any Housing Authority development where you're expressing preferences about which development you're most interested in. You would be saying, I want to live at 148 River Ford Parkway and am on that targeted wait list. You could be on both wait lists.
And so can you be chronically homeless and on this list?
Yes, folks wouldn't be screened out based on that. I would not anticipate that many people,
Like, could you get all 50? Can you still end up with 50?
Recently unhoused folks that might need more service.
yeah, certainly in theory, I would say in reality, that will not happen. That would depend on people who have high acuity, who have really complex needs and are in extraordinary crisis, going through a pretty complex process without dedicated support to access those units. I think that's highly unlikely.
Because the reason I'm asking that is I know that sometimes folks from that group with support have ended up in other housing authority properties. So are we saying that organizations dedicated to providing support would not be gearing them in this direction? Like, say if Compass Point is full and you're working with a couple of folks, say Homeward Bound, it's working with folks trying to get them housed. Are we saying they would not put them on or try to have them put on this waiting list? If so, if not, why not?
And
So
who decides is really the ultimate question.
Yeah.
okay, great. So several pieces. So if you are a housing or homeless services program or housing program working with someone who currently does not have housing, then your role is to assess their particular housing needs and pursue all of the options that could be a fit for their needs. Part of that assessment should include whether or not they need supportive services in order to be stable in housing, and whether or not they have access to those services with a particular housing unit. So you want, and I'm saying this, based on my prior life as a service provider, you want to really understand what will work for a household and not just put people in housing that's not going to be a good fit for them. So the housing provider should be working, or service provider should be working with the individual to understand best housing options for them. So that's kind of this part, funneled down to if the best housing option for them or a viable housing option for them seems to be 148 River Ford Parkway, then they would apply through the housing authority to join the wait list for that property, meeting those housing authority, the income criteria, et cetera. And then additionally, the property owner, as with any private property, the property owner has their own screening criteria through property management, as you mentioned, that folks would need to be able to comply with in order to then be able to lease the unit.
Okay, that's helpful. Since there are two different and possibly three different crowds of folks here, are they going to be separated by floors? Like, do we have vets and like floors 4 through 8? I mean, does anybody know, or maybe Ayush, are you?
We have not, as you can understand, this has been an evolving process. What we have contemplated is actually, rather than separation by floors, separation by building. So we have 2 buildings, and we were thinking that the veterans would be in one building to be able to have a community there, and then the PBV folks would be in another building. And that is as far as we have thought it through.
That's helpful. Thank you. And thanks for being here today.
Why do it that way? Why is that?
Because the veterans folks also have case managers and have social services associated with them. At this point, as I said, it's very early. It could be based on acuity as well. We're just unclear at this point what the population is going to be with specificity. We also understand from a number of people as we've had these conversations, there is this need to create a community and have like experienced folks. So maybe veterans should be together. Maybe they should be with, everyone else in terms of like just other, just the full tenant population. We're still assessing that. I just wanted to point out though that we've thought a little bit about it, and as much as we have thought about it, we've just gotten to the point where maybe we can maximize the 2 buildings in some way.
Did you consider all VASH vouchers?
They don't have that many vouchers. We're restricted by the number of PBVs that exist and the number of VASH vouchers that exist, I understand. Jerry's here. He wanted to say something.
Hey, nice to see y'all. I'm Jerry Kivett-Kimber. I'm the HUD VASH supervisor for Buncombe County. While we do have 366 vouchers here in Buncombe County currently, 50 of those are in the project-based voucher registry based on sort of the initial iteration of the project and initial commitment from the Housing Authority. And I, outside of those 50, have less than 10 available. The rest are in the hands of a veteran, and close to 90% of those are leased up. Well, actually 90% on the nose are leased up as well. So not just in the hand of a veteran, but in a lease agreement with a landlord. So there would be potential to request more vouchers down the road and potentially expand further into the project. Like, for example, those 13 units without subsidy, I'm particularly interested in expanding into those units down the road as there's vacancies in the project. So I think there would be room for growth of HUD VASH, but at the current moment do not have 100 vouchers to meet that need. And just would also add that the site-based waitlist piece that is being discussed is a model that already exists in Asheville, like Woodridge Apartments, even like Maple Crest. So sort of that model is already existent with our local housing authority.
How long would it take to get additional vouchers or VASH vouchers?
It just depends on when the NOFA comes out. So typically, HUD VASH was started in like 2008, and typically there's a request for more voucher allocations in the spring and in the fall. So the soonest would be like March, April. So still during the the construction period, excuse me, more could be requested, but didn't feel confident in like in this moment committing 100 vouchers when I don't technically have 100 vouchers to commit. Typically I'm getting what I'm requesting in terms of awards for additional vouchers, both with Asheville Housing and the surrounding housing authorities in Western North Carolina, but it is a national request and can technically be competitive. So there is no guarantee that you'll get the exact amount that you're awarded. It is dependent on how much funding HUD has available at any given time and how many other housing authorities request vouchers.
So I guess as you're probably gleaning, I'd be really comfortable with 100 VASH. And when I hear that, I'm also going, there's no guarantee that you're going to get the other 50 project-based vouchers, because I imagine that would have to open up for an RFP process.
There is an RFP process. We received an RFP yesterday. We will be responding. A condition of our closing on the site is being able to secure the necessary project-based vouchers or the project doesn't work. So if we were not successful in securing those, we would not move forward with the project.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. And so from my perspective, I feel like what council is being asked to do is to change the restrictive covenant that runs with the land, and all of the other stuff really is outside our purview because we don't own the property. Once the restriction is changed, when you go through, we have no say. I'll just voice early on, Sage, I would be more comfortable with more VASH because the other 50 leaves the door open for me, just signaling that to you early on. Go ahead.
I want to make sure I understand too. So we've got a former agreement with the Housing Authority to do 100 project-based vouchers, 50 for vet, 50 otherwise. Now we're hearing from Jerry who's saying there are not 100 VASH vouchers available. There might be in the future when a NOFA happens, which is a notice of funding availability, NOFA. But I did kind of hear that you have 60. You have 60.
No. There are 50 and 50 available.
Yes.
50 Jerry has committed to for the site. The other 50 require a NOFA process or an RFP process
Oh,
be
so
to be-
those 50
That
are,
process started yesterday. Ms. Pierre has sent out a NOFA in anticipation of this need. Because they were previously designated towards the developer, the previous developer, and not the site. And they usually are
Okay.
to the site. So she has to go through a new procurement process. She has started that. And should we succeed, we will have the other 50.
okay, got it. And then if I understand, thank you for that. And if I understand, your ability to close on this is hinging on the condition of our changing of the deed restriction and those 50.
Correct.
Okay, so we might even say agree to the deed lift and then you not get the vouchers?
That's possible if we're not successful in the NOFA process.
Does that put us in limbo that we might remove a deed restriction and then have a completely different project in the end if the 50 vouchers aren't confirmed?
And this is Nikki Reed. I just chatted Janice to really think about the finer points because my assumption right now is that we would record that change to the deed restriction at the closing table simultaneously with the closing.
So we would layer in our own requirement of those 50 project-based, of it being project-based vouchers, 100 of them,
No, that's not
No,
exactly.
but being affordable
just being affordable.
at 50% AMI.
Okay, which is vouchers. Okay, interesting. Just trying to make sure I understand all the details in this very quickly moving project.
And this
Janice?
is Janice. I think I think we have to refine the language. There is a draft city council approval, and we're gonna have to make sure when it will come into effect, if there is this chance that they might, excuse me, we would only change it if they were moving forward with the project. So it's.
Okay. And then I guess, I guess we don't have the housing authority here, but if say the 50 and the 50 get established and everything happens, construction happens, but then there's a NOFA and more potentially VASH vouchers came online later. I mean, at that point, the project's just kind of out on its own. It will be up to the owner of the property to decide if they want to bring in more VASH vouchers or not. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, interesting.
And I'll just say I've heard an openness from Friendship, from the management company, and from Ms. Pierre at Asheville Housing. She's a big supporter of BASH and really appreciate your words of support for HUD BASH, Councilwoman Mosley as well. I really do appreciate that support of the work we're doing to support homeless veterans in our community. And so I do think there's the possibility of expansion. I think the 50 in that original iteration is of the project was based on sort of the veteran by name list and sort of what is the veteran need for homelessness in our community. While there are about 200 veterans who are literally homeless right now in Asheville, I do think 50 really is kind of the sweet spot for those HUD-VASH units in terms of who are the veterans who are chronically homeless, who have comorbid, trimorbid sort of clinical needs, because about 100 of those 200 are being served through the VRQ's transitional housing program and don't even necessarily require like a HUD-VASH or SSVF level of care. And then SSVF is also taking a large number of those veterans in rapid rehousing. Like not every veteran needs a long-term permanent rental assistance and supportive housing program. We're intended for sort of the most high need veterans in our community. And so I think having an additional 50 affordable units feels like a net gain in a community that is in desperate need of affordable housing for not just veterans is my perspective as a housing provider.
Thank you so much for that. I'm wondering, is that 200 a number that has been growing or decreasing? Because I'm trying to figure out when this would technically be open for operations, and do you anticipate that need is going to increase or decrease?
To be totally honest, I anticipate veteran need to remain about the same in our community. I kind of expect it to plateau to some degree. We're just ranked #1 best VA overall throughout the whole country and like top 10 for veteran care, which is something we're really proud of, but that also brings a lot of under-resourced veterans to our community to try to access our excellent medical care here at our medical center. And then we do have the nation's largest grant per diem program. So the Veterans Restoration Quarters in terms of GPD programs is larger than the one in LA, it's larger than the one in New York, Miami. It is a very large transitional housing program for veterans. And so the reality is, as we are emptying beds and getting them into housing, new veterans are coming into our community and filling those beds because we have a disproportionate number of shelter beds in our community for veterans. Then like our community is 20-25% of the homeless population is a veteran. In most communities, it's 10% or less. And the VRQ and then the prestige of our VA are a big part of that. So I do imagine the veteran need will continue to look the same as long as we continue to draw under-resourced veterans and maintain the number of shelter beds that we're currently maintaining for veterans.
So I commend you on the wonderful work you do. The reason I keep pushing this direction is I love the services you provide to veterans too. And I want you to do more of it, but I'll give it back to you, Sage.
No, and congratulations. I second that. And congratulations on the awarding of #1. I mean, that's incredible. It does make me wonder if we couldn't get to 60 right now and tackle those last 10 you're talking about. But okay, I think we interrupted your presentation. Emily, keep going.
Listen, you're ahead of the curve. You're hitting a lot of the highlights, so I'll be quick in the rest of this. This is the project configuration. This is just an updated slide from the slide you saw before, reflecting the change. I think you're clear on all of this. So Friendship would use their own funding to purchase and renovate the property, would access vouchers, as you've just been talking about. Overbrook Management would continue to be their partner for property management and security. And then Jerry's team would provide those on-site supportive services for the veteran units. They are scheduled to close October 1st. Closing is contingent on both the deed restriction modification and project-based vouchers from the Housing Authority. I will talk more about this a bit later, but one implication of the project change is that no local funding is now necessary to create those units. So that 1.5 million of city funding that was originally requested is now available to be redirected elsewhere. 500,000 of that was ARPA funding previously authorized for this project and based on Treasury guidance must be used for homeless services. The COC board made some recommendations about that at their meeting last week, so I'll share that in a bit. And then that other million is city capital funding and can be reprogrammed at any time. So last week at the Continuum of Care board meeting on September 12th, they heard a presentation about the proposed reconfiguration and unanimously approved 2 recommendations to City Council. First, they did unanimously approve a recommendation to modify the deed restriction as requested from 100 units of permanent supportive housing to 50 units of permanent supportive housing and 50 units of affordable housing. And 2, they made a recommendation to allocate that 500,000 in ARPA funding to 278,000 to Code Purple and then 222,000 to emergency shelter and supportive services. And overall, I think their discussion certainly emphasized the need for the Continuum of Care to continue planning efforts to plan for additional permanent supportive housing development in the community.
Okay, go ahead, Councilwoman Mosley.
Can you give me examples of what the 222,000 to emergency shelter and supportive services would be?
Yes, so could be staff costs or operational costs for any of our existing emergency shelters. And then supportive services tends to mean case management and associated activities. Could also mean housing placement support or just direct service work at homeless service agencies.
So is Code Purple a form of emergency shelter?
It is, yes, you're exactly right. They did, so the board heard a presentation about ABCCM's plan for Code Purple, and ABCCM had submitted a budget request significantly beyond the $100,000 that is budgeted from the city and county. So the Continuum of Care board wanted to particularly carve out a recommendation for Code Purple to ensure that that service is available this winter. But yes, you're right, that is emergency shelter. They also are recommending that the other portion be available for emergency shelter and supportive services.
And so that would be stuff like safe shelter and maybe even help me.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Shelter, yeah, exactly right. Yes. All right. So process, again, council action is requested on this. That would be modifying the deed restriction as we've discussed. That is scheduled for city council consideration next week at your September 24th meeting. Closing is contingent on that action as well as on vouchers. And staff are supporting the reconfigured project based on the leveraging of private investment of an estimated $18 million to create 113 units of affordable housing for veterans and for folks who are at or below 50% AMI. So Friendship has already been participating in our discussion. I imagine you all have more questions, but I will just turn it over to Friendship directly to see if you want to add anything based on this discussion. And then certainly they can answer any questions you may have.
Anyone from Friendship care to share anything else?
I think it's been covered. I don't want to duplicate what Emily has put forth,
One question.
but we're
for me
available
is-
for questions.
Okay, one question from me is, and I just can't recall, so the two buildings, does anybody know how many units roughly are in each? What's the makeup of each building?
63 and about 50.
So if,
It's a little bit, Ilusham, hi, this is Ari. Yeah, it's not quite half and half, but it's close to half and half. It's a little bit flexible. We can work with the architect if we need to change it a little bit, but there'll be a
That's
little
true.
more than 50 in the veteran building and a little more than 50 in the other building.
and is there any interest in trying to, I mean, if you're looking at having veterans in one building and other residents in the other building, why not just fill one with vag? 'Cause it's-
Correct. So yeah, we've talked to Callum about that. So we talked to I'm sorry, Jerry, about that. The goal would be to get portable VASH vouchers for all the rest of the units.
Okay, so not all VASH vouchers are project-based, right? So we've got a mix here of project-based VASH, project-based, just, I guess, project-based vouchers from HACA, and then mobile, or project-based from HACA, tenant-based from HACA, tenant-based from VASH, and project-based VASH. The four types.
Right. So well,
Yes.
not really. So, there will be eventually, but remember, project-based, only the project-based are assigned. So
Right.
when we open, or like 90 days before we open, we will pursue to fill the extra 13 units with tenant-based
Tenant-based.
vouchers. And our goal would be to work with Jerry to fill some more VASH units with tenant-based vouchers for that building.
And then all the vouchers, I mean, they're capped at 50 AMI, right? That's why we're using that as the ceiling here. Vouchers are 50 AMI and below. You can get a voucher for 60 to 70 AMI now, or no?
Technically, HUD-VASH is up to 80% AMI for eligibility criteria.
Just VASHs, okay.
But these, yeah. And
Okay.
but the ones that are available on the PBV side are 50.
So all PBVs are 50 or below, okay.
HUD-VASH just has some additional flexibilities that HUD and VA have come together to say, we will have these particular special flexibilities and policies for the HUD-VASH program to support the joint mission of ending veteran homelessness. So there's some cool stuff that we're lucky to be able to do.
That's great, okay. Councilwoman Mosley, any other questions?
No, I'm just gonna say, I still want to do 100 VASH, whether they're project-based or tenant-based. I think it can be done.
In the future, based on another NOFA and more vouchers being allocated, like Jerry said.
I think that can be done before the project opens. I think it can.
Except we'd have to bet
But-
on this idea that a NOFA will happen and more will become available.
Well, we're betting on the idea that they're gonna get the 50% project-based vouchers. We don't know that to be the case.
Right.
yet.
Doesn't that
will
feel a little
say-
backwards? How are we gonna vote to lift a deed restriction before all this is known?
Because it won't actually be lifted until it closes.
Correct.
It's
So
right, it's a
if
conditional
we
It's a
approve-
conditional restriction lifting.
Right, so if we say approve this as written today, and then you don't get your 50 vouchers, then we're back at the starting point. You don't end up with a project with a deed lifted. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
okay. Interesting. All right, just making sure I fully understand the details. I appreciate you answering our questions. Any other questions out there right now? Okay, so any other slides? That's it?
I do have a couple other slides about the ARPA recommendation.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
In particular. So per Treasury guidance, City Council needs to reallocate the final ARPA funding into activities by October 11th. That doesn't mean specific projects or contracts, but just buckets of activity by October 11th. And so with that in mind, the COC board unanimously recommended considering allocations as we discussed. So 278,000 for Code Purple. That number is directly based on the cost estimate from ABCCM for the coming winter for Code Purple. Recognizing that we would still need a typical funding process for that. So that's not a recommendation directly to ABCCM, but is a recommendation for that amount for Code Purple activities. And then 222 for emergency shelter and supportive services. So process-wise, if City Council approves that recommendation next week on September 24th, then we would initiate that funding opportunity open to the COC membership. COC Funding Committee would review requests received, develop recommendations back to the COC board. They would vote on a final recommendation to City Council, and then City Council would make the final decision about particular projects and amounts to be awarded. So again, following that same funding process that we use for our federal funding. And then this is last slide, two possible motions for consideration, one related to the deed restriction and one related to the ARPA funding.
Okay. Jerry, can you come back for a second? Thank you. I really appreciate you being here today. I'm curious, since you're really the expert in this area and you guys are doing so well and you spoke highly of the VRQ, do you feel confident that potentially by the time this is built, you might have 100 or so veterans in need that you could place there? I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is VRQ's success is a tell in itself. Like, we don't know. I feel a little bit as a city councilor, like I am experimenting here. I'm not an expert in this field. We've got the Days Inn to kind of look to as a model. And I'm just wondering, if VRQ is so exceptional in their services, does that, because they're all veterans, is there some kind of dynamic here that we should really try and focus on another veterans campus without another influx of different population? And would it be more successful? And would we have that many needs? What's your confidence level?
I think that's a complicated answer. I think there would certainly be 100 veterans in need of affordable housing in our community, but I think the distinguishing piece is, do they need a HUD-VASH level of care? Are they like really that chronically homeless veteran who needs permanent rental assistance from the voucher, and then also the long-term in-home clinical services for my team as well? And the reality is that the majority of veterans at the VRQ just don't need that level of service. They need a security deposit, maybe a couple months rent through the rapid rehousing program, supportive services for veteran families that Homeward Bound runs. That's how the majority of people are moving out of VRQ, is through Homeward Bound assistance. If you look at the actual numbers and data of like people who are leaving VRQ through just VRQ assistance, that data is actually not very good. It's primarily HUD-VASH and Homeward Bound's SSVF program that are successfully exiting people to permanent housing from the VRQ. I also hear Scott Rogers talking a lot about building permanent housing next to the VRQ and TRV, and that housing feels actually like the most appropriate intervention for those lower acuity, less high need veterans. That is more sort of the the bread and butter of who ABCCM and the VRQ serves. I would say that population looks a little different than the veterans that I serve. I have veterans who are banned from the VRQ. I have veterans who are camping outside because they have a dog with them or a girlfriend with them, and have trans veterans that don't feel like they can access a more binary gender shelter. So I have folks who are literally homeless that ABCCM services don't quite fit. So I see the housing they intend to build as the most appropriate way to meet that ever kind of inflow of veterans that are coming to the VRQ and coming for care here at the medical center. I think 50 feels like the most appropriate place to start based on what the by name list looks like right now on the veteran side of things. But I'm very interested in expanding and growing. I think that could be a really healthy model to kind of start at the 50 or 63. And then as, you know, units maybe vacate or people are evicted, you could easily, HUD-VASH, it's really easy to switch from a tenant to a project-based voucher. And you could easily kind of slowly expand into the project and expand for the veterans. I do think the 50 is sort of based on what the need will look like of those most high acuity veterans, and that what ABCCM's plans are would maybe meet the need of some of those other VRQ folks. I feel really good about this iteration because I think I very much always have my veteran hat on of wanting to end veteran homelessness, but I also worked in Asheville doing homeless and housing services for like 7 years before coming over to the VA with civilians. And I just know there's a real deep need for affordable housing in our community. So those 50 affordable units that aren't specific to veterans feels like a net gain. There's so many resources for veterans in our community that civilians just don't have access to. And I think I love hearing this positive feedback about HUD-VASH and the VA and deeply appreciate it and have a lot of gratitude for the respect y'all have for the work. And I think the VA is really just proof in the pudding that when we invest in affordable housing, when we invest in solutions and resources for everyone, those things work out and we have the outcomes we're looking for through them. So I feel good about this and also have interest in growing or expanding as well. That's not maybe the most helpful answer. I'm going to
It is, though. It really is. I so appreciate you being here today and sharing your input. I really do. Okay, so hearing that, how about I'm going to try and tackle one of the motions by making a motion that HCD recommend that City Council allocate $500,000 in ARPA funding for homelessness services as follows and receive recommendations from the COC prior to awarding specific projects: $278,000 for Code Purple and $222,000 for emergency shelter and supportive services.
I'll second.
Okay, virtual. So we'll do a roll call vote. Councilwoman Mosley.
Aye.
Myself, aye. Okay, so that recommendation will move forward to council. Now we've got this other one. I sense we may, I can make this motion. I'll try. Hearing from Jerry that he also supports this particular setup. I'm kind of curious about moving it to 63 veterans, but I'm a little hesitant. Jerry, you said 50 or 63. If we said 63, do you think that would be helpful? More
Are you
about
asking me?
Yes. Well, I'm just curious because I don't want to restrict this to an activity that cannot happen. Right.
I feel highly confident I can take on the 63 in terms of having the veterans to put in the units and having the staff to support them. I think full transparency, I don't have like 63 in terms of what Ms. Pierre holds at HACA concretely in this moment. Those 63 don't exist, but I've talked to the regional coordinator for the Southeast and for the Northwest because she was my predecessor. I've always gotten what I've asked for every single year, and so has Meredith before me for 10 years. And there's always been a NOFA every year. So my regional coordinator is telling me there's no reason to not be confident, unless the full government shuts down. I think I feel like 99% confident that I would have those 63 for certain.
Okay. And because it's a deed restriction, I don't think we can, Well, Janice is here, I guess. We could say 50 to 63, but I guess that gets complicated, huh? We really want to set a number.
Yeah, it complicates it a little, and it might, I mean, if I'm understanding correctly, even if you voted for the way it's written now, if you got the additional 13 units of VASH, they could go into those 50% units. It's just, it would be a different kind of voucher. So even 99%, I would think that the developer would feel better going in with this 50 units and the 50 units with the VASH, which we know you have the VASH for. And then in between those, you could still fill some of those 50% units, right? I think Jerry's shaking.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, the developer and the owner could, but this is the only moment in time that council will be able to impact what we're restricting the property to. So I'm trying to balance that because I can hear from Councilwoman Mosley that she would prefer it to be all veterans. And I have an interest in that, but I'm also hearing from our veteran representative here that we're not at that place to do that. So I'm trying to figure out how to get us closer to that because I think more veterans there and like a veterans campus, especially after hearing from Jerry say that there are some folks that just don't even use VRQ or go ahead. Hi, Alicia, go ahead.
Oh, also from a developer perspective, we absolutely, I mean, we said this from the beginning when we started this process, that we absolutely need to have certainty of the vouchers that are available to us at this point in order to
Right.
be able to move forward to closing. And what we were told was on the table was 50 vouchers from VASH and 50 vouchers, 50 PBVs, possibly.
Okay, well, I'm going to make a motion. We'll see how it goes. I recommend that City Council authorize the city manager to modify the deed restriction at the former Ramada at 148 River Ford Parkway to 50 units of permanent supportive housing and 50 units of affordable housing for persons making 50% or less of AMI. And I don't have a second. So I sense that we will not have a recommendation in either direction going to council. Antoinette, you would probably make a motion right now for all VASH, and I guess I would not second it simply because I don't feel like
I wouldn't make it for all VASH. I would say 50 VASH and then 50 for veterans earning 80% AMI or less. If I were to make a motion, that's what I would say.
But is the VASH voucher that you have 80% AMI, Jerry?
No, it's still if I'm being honest, the reason I have pause is I'm not certain about the developer. But I have confidence in the VA portion. So the more I can get to the VA portion, because quite frankly, some of the developers are former Shangri-La and also don't even live in the United States. So I'm not sure that this would even necessarily be able to go forward, but I have more confidence in services being provided by Jerry et al. That's my real way of
I
thinking.
appreciate that perspective. I guess I'm also weighing the perspective that we have a developer here willing to invest, I mean, is it 15, 16, 18 million dollars in redevelopment that normally when we see an affordable housing project come to us, it is layered with, we need $2 million for land. We need $4 million in low interest loans. We need $1.5 million in grants, you know, and it's like us stacking the whole process to get to those affordable units. So I am also I'm thrilled that we have a developer that wants to invest that on their own. I'm less concerned where they come from, but I understand the concerns around this previous process with Shangri-La and what happened in the community and how poorly it was received. And, you know, it upset a lot of folks who work in this industry that entity fell apart the way it did. And there is concern that some of these current applicants are members of that old team. So I understand all the concern. I don't think we're going to get a motion through here today, guys. I will voice that I do support another fully veterans campus if we got there. I don't think that we're in a position to deed restrict it to that. I think that could be problematic for the developer who doesn't have the things on the table right now that can get them to a closing. So I still want to see the affordable housing, and I still have a lot of questions about how these two different populations will mesh together. So again, I feel like a city councilor having to do some like experimenting here that doesn't make me feel really good. So I'm leaning heavily on the COC at their expertise, because that's what we set them up for. And I'm leaning heavily on their recommendation to move this forward as is. So that's likely where I will fall. Go ahead, Janice.
Would it make any difference if the deed restriction said that there would be a preference for the 50% units to be filled with either VASH or veterans? We can do that.
Okay,
And then we can, I mean, that doesn't matter. Okay. Because I was saying we could monitor it and there'd have to be a system set up to show how they were managing those, but just thought I'd mention that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess when we do like a Luigi or something, it is baked into the process that we have access to their rent rolls at request, and we can prove that and verify that they're providing, you know, revenues or rooms to folks that are in need, right? We set that up as a accountability factor, but in this case, we wouldn't have that.
No, we would. The deed
would.
restriction is the same.
Okay.
We've written the deed restriction that works the same way as the deed restrictions for Luigi. The only deed restriction that's not that way is the one for the other property, which just makes it for residential, and that's baked into the deed itself. But this is a deed restriction just like we usually use. It's between the city and the owner.
Okay. Well, if staff, when you are making your notes for how this moves forward to council, the whole council, if you could also layer in that I'm expressing some interest in language that would lead to more preference for veterans, but I don't know how we restrict it to that. We have time to figure that out by the 24th. Go ahead, Emily.
I just would, again, excuse me, sort of underscore what Jerry mentioned earlier, that based on the data that we have at present and the historic data in our community, we don't see demand for that volume of HUD-BASH units in this particular community. So would, certainly appropriate to identify a preference population, but we don't have a history that demonstrates that we need 100 or 113 units of HUD-BASH in our
right. And that's why that tenant-based veterans could work. But okay, I think
that's right. Allows some flexibility.
Okay. Any other thoughts, questions, comments on this particular item on the agenda before we move on? Okay. One thing, I did get a request for you all that to schedule an in-person meeting, that the time of, there was a commitment to schedule an in-person meeting, but the window of opportunity is closing. There's a request that you kind of get that on a calendar today so that folks can amend their schedules or attend if needed. If you could do that, we would, I would certainly appreciate it. I'm hearing from neighborhood associations and et cetera that they're waiting for that opportunity.
We will have one by the end of the day today, and
Perfect.
And a location at a time. We've been working closely with Rach to try and figure it out. It's a little bit obviously more complicated than the virtual ones, but we will have that sorted by the end of the day today. But we appreciate that. Thank you for reminding us.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. For those of you following along, we have concluded item number 3 on our agenda. We're moving on to item number 4, which is fiscal year 2025 Housing and Community Development Committee work planning. Who are we hearing from?
I will get us started, Councilmember Turner. So good morning again, Rachel Wood, Assistant City Manager, and do want to acknowledge that we are a little bit later than we would typically be providing the work plan presentation, and that is really just a result of how busy this committee has been with some time-sensitive items. So do appreciate your flexibility on this, and just know that several of the items that came before you today are part of the work plan that we've had in place since the start of the fiscal year. We're just a little bit delayed in getting this to you. Next slide, please, Katie. So quick reminder, your work plans are reviewed and developed on an annual basis, and they serve as tools to plan for and better organize the work of your committee. Your work plans are informed by your annual strategic priorities that are typically set at your annual retreat, and goal statements, as well as the committee's scope of work. And those scope of works were most recently reviewed, I believe, in November of 2022. Committee work plans include a combination of ongoing as well as administrative items, along with policy considerations that include specific assignments for advisory boards and other committees. And your work plans are intended to be dynamic living documents that serve as a guide for the committee as well as staff and advisory board members throughout the fiscal year. Next slide, please, Katie. So quick reminder of your scope of work, and I'm not going to read through this verbatim, but the Housing and Community Development Committee is charged with reviewing and making policy recommendations that enhance quality of life on matters related to the creation and maintenance of housing within the city, including public housing and affordable private housing. HCD is also responsible for reviewing policy matters related to solving homelessness and the provision of services to the unhoused population, and also oversees the city's investment in federal housing and urban development funding programs to address a wide range of community development needs. Next slide, please. So key policy topic areas, and again, this was reviewed by staff as well as by council about 2 years ago, but broadly categorized here, it's housing affordability and supply, housing incentives, homelessness, and then those HUD-funded investments through the Community Development Block Grant as well as home. Next slide, please, Katie. So just a quick reminder, while none of the city council priorities are mutually exclusive, there are 2 strategic priorities that were established really 2 fiscal years ago, but you continued for the current fiscal year 2025. And those 2 strategic priorities that are most closely aligned with this committee include equitable and affordable housing and stability, as well as homelessness strategies. And then this is our 2nd fiscal year having city council goal statements that are aligned with the strategic priorities, which have been really helpful for staff, just giving us another level of flexibility to better understand where you would like staff to be focusing our energy as we work toward moving the needle on your strategic priority areas. So under equitable and affordable housing and stability, there are 3 strategic priority goal statements. They include implement anti-displacement strategies while increasing housing supply in strategic areas, corridors, and reducing barriers to construction. Incentive access for low-income residents households with emphasis on equitable growth, and continue to update the Unified Development Ordinance. And I will note under the UDO that regulatory updates will be vetted primarily through the Planning and Economic Development Committee. And also as a quick reminder, we do have a city council work session scheduled for September 24th, where we are going to be talking about more broadly our affordable housing strategy, and then more specifically with our programmatic and regulatory plans for the current fiscal year that we're in for affordable housing and anti-displacement. Yes, Councilmember Mosley.
So for our work session on Tuesday, will we be presented with a hyper-focused anti-displacement map?
I would call it more of a roadmap than a map. I think it's going to be focused on the programs and then also the regulatory components that you're going to take separate action on. And again, those regulatory actions around the UDO will be going through the Planning and Economic Development.
Excuse me, I'm so sorry. What I meant is literally a map that says these neighborhoods will be afforded additional protections.
So we're going to be talking, I think, more conceptually about the development of a potential overlay, if that's what you're asking, but I don't think the specific map is going to be discussed. I know, Nikki, you've had more recent conversations with staff on the regulatory considerations, so I'm not sure if you're aware of a specific map being shared this coming Tuesday.
I'm not, but I know the intent is to provide a preliminary concept for a regulatory tool that I believe addresses that item. And so I know that staff has been attentive to that conversation that's been had at council, and does have, at least in our draft key takeaways, some information about the regulatory tool that I believe is consistent with that goal that you're referencing, Councilwoman Antoinette Mosley.
So there is a document floating around that I was forwarded being called the overlay. Is this a staff produced document or a community member produced document? It contains extensive extensive language and images.
I'm not aware of what you've got access to, Councilmember Turner.
I'll
if you
forward
wanna
it to you.
share
I
that.
received it from a
Sure.
community. Yeah, it's pretty long. I didn't know. I mean, I guess here's what I'll say. When these documents around this particular item are available to anyone, please make sure that the council gets them so that I am not in the difficult position of what happened yesterday, which is trying to review something that may or not even be something we produced and trying to answer questions to it from media that I haven't even seen. So if there is anything, please send it to us so we have it. And if it isn't from us, well, someone out there is working on it. Go ahead, Antoinette.
I don't know what document you got. I haven't received another document, but I do think that there has been discussions among each of the neighborhoods listed in the displacement analysis. So I think the community members are working on their own.
Oh, interesting.
Because I don't think they think staff, while well-intentioned, might not have the time to do it just yet. So I think their goal is to be helpful.
Okay. Yeah, that's great.
I think.
I mean, that's formative information, rather than responsive information. So that could be helpful. Okay, I will forward you all what I received, just so you have it and can speak to it, but keep going. Okay.
Yeah, and just to re-emphasize, the intent of Tuesday is to have dialogue with full council, and we want to make sure that you're aware of what our plan is before really focusing in on that work. Not to say that the work hasn't already started, but we want to make sure, to your point, Councilmember Turner, that we're not heading in the wrong direction. And we also want to make sure you're fully aware of what we've got underway and what our plans are so that we can get feedback and make sure where we're going is what you have intended. So just want you to know that I'm not aware of drafts that staff have produced that are being circulated out there. I could be wrong, but do appreciate you sending that draft to us just so that we all have awareness.
I will. Thank you.
Lastly, you've got the houselessness strategies, strategic priority, and the goal statement for that is through partnerships, make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring by targeting strategies recommended by the National Alliance to End Homelessness. And I hope, even as is evidenced by today's conversation with Emily Ball, we have been much more intentional in having those touch points with this committee on the work that we have going on with the continuum of care and other supports that the city has from our homeless strategies division. Next slide, please, Katie. So a focus of this fiscal year with all of our council committees is just making sure we have better connective tissue between the advisory boards and the council committees. And this committee really did kind of pilot and set the tone for that over the course of the last 2 years. But the advisory boards that are most closely linked, and again, not mutually exclusive, but those that have closest linkage include the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, and then the Continuum of Care, as well as the Asheville Regional Housing Consortium. Next slide, please, Katie. So this is a list of the general work plan topics, and then in the next few slides, we'll go into what we're planning on bringing to you each date. Under homelessness strategies, we've got high access shelter strategy, continuum of care, strategic plan development. Emily mentioned that earlier in her COC update presentation, and then having regular continuum of care updates to this committee. Then under equitable and affordable housing instability, you'll have the HUD consolidated plan. This is your 5-year plan, and that's going to be a major topic of discussion with this committee later this fiscal year. The implementation strategies around the affordable housing plan. Again, a lot of that is going to be discussed this coming Tuesday at the work session, and that includes anti-displacement strategies as well as enhanced affordable housing incentive monitoring and reporting. So that is aligned not only with recommendations that we got from Enterprise on the affordable housing plan, but also recommendations that we got from the Cease the Harm audit, and then considerations around revisions to the Housing Trust Fund policy. Some of the more standard items that come every year to this committee include CDBG funding allocations, as well as your annual allocations from the Housing Trust Fund. Next slide, please, Katie. So then looking more specifically at what we've got penciled in for each month, and I do want to note that the schedule may be adjusted based on things that come up throughout the fiscal year. This is a plan, but it's also intended to be a dynamic plan. So in October, following that September 24th work plan, there will be a targeted conversation with this committee related to the implementation of the affordable housing plan and next steps, action steps for the anti-displacement strategies, and that is the programmatic strategies that'll be coming to this committee. Also an update on our affordable housing data monitoring, affordable housing centralized waitlist plan, tax relief for low-income homeowners, and increased awareness of resource and rights. And so a lot of this is directly aligned with that first year roadmap that came out of the Affordable Housing Plan, which was published earlier this month. And then we'll have a conversation around the HUD 5-year consolidated plan update from our Community Development Division. Moving into November, continued discussion around implementation of the Affordable Housing Plan. This will include a discussion around funds that could be made available to the Housing Trust Fund in advance of the application cycle. Of course, in November, we will know if our affordable housing bond referendum was passed. And then considerations around funding for anti-displacement strategies. Those are the items that are not bond eligible. So how can we potentially use general fund allocation for the Housing Trust Fund to help support some of those programs? We are looking at December potentially being a break, but of course want to get feedback from the committee members. I believe the date currently penciled for the December Housing and Community Development Committee would be December 17th. So that's getting really close to the holidays. And so right now we don't have any topics planned, but of course, if things come up that are time sensitive, we could use that time. Then looking into the start of calendar year 2025, at the beginning of each fiscal year, that's typically when we have the advisory boards provide their annual report updates so that you can get that feedback heading into your annual retreat. So you'll hear from AHAC as well as a quarterly COC update from Emily Ball, and then continued updates on the affordable housing plan implementation with a specific focus on home repair and that anti-displacement strategy. Next slide, please. Then February is when CDBG application review and scoring will occur. And this gets to be some of those more administrative items. We have a pretty predictable spring with the Housing and Community Development Committee. March would be Housing Trust Fund application reviews and the HUD consolidated plan. April would be CDBG funding recommendations, Housing Trust Fund allocations, another COC update from Emily, and then a discussion around the centralized application waitlist. Next slide, please, Katie. May, we will have Housing Trust Fund policy revisions where we'll be seeking feedback. In June, we'll have Housing Trust Fund policy revisions where there will be action requested from the committee. And I don't have this listed on the work plan yet, but I do anticipate by May, we will have a work plan discussion for fiscal year 2026 with this committee, just as we're looking at that second year of implementation of the affordable housing plan, and then any other feedback that we get throughout the year as it pertains to the items within this committee's scope of work. Next slide, please. So immediate next steps, we've already touched on the upcoming work session several times, but you will be getting a more specific roadmap of what our affordable housing strategy looks like from both the regulatory and programmatic perspective next Tuesday, starting at 3 o'clock. And then September and October, staff are going to provide updates to impacted advisory boards just around what's in the work plan. I know some of those conversations have already started, and then specifically those conversations between the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee and the Affordable Housing Plan implementation. And then as needed, we'll have updates directly from the advisory boards and other committees back to this committee. And then we'll review planned agenda items with you. The upcoming planned agenda items are listed on each HCD agenda. You've got bullets for what we have planned for the next few months. And so that's an opportunity for you to review and provide feedback. And then annually, we'll have reports from the advisory boards. Next slide, please. And that takes us back to the key takeaways. Again, the work plans are intended to serve as an overall guide for this committee, also intended to be dynamic. And we will continue to have conversations with you throughout the fiscal year to make sure that the topics that we have planned for this committee and the items that are referred from this committee to the advisory board are meeting your expectations or and are in keeping with ultimately realizing your strategic priority goals. And you can take down the presentation, Katie.
Thank you, Rachel. Where is land use incentive grant?
So right now we've got that programmed for early fiscal year 2026.
We are going to pause it that long?
Yeah, with the focus being on anti-displacement strategies, it just kind of had us shift back some of our other policy review topics.
I think that is a very poor move that we would let it sit idle and unusable for so long. I'm already hearing from developers that are kind of waiting to see when it comes back online. I don't want to tell them 2026. If we need to improve it, can we not work on it? I mean, I understand your workload, but I was not expecting it to be offline for a year and a half or 2 years.
I'll just share that some of the thinking behind that really came from the conversations that we had at council, with the idea being that if we don't have proper data, that we can't inform good policy. So we're wanting to really zero in on that in terms of the next 6 months of really being our focus. You saw that in our work plan, we're referencing the work around monitoring and then looking to how we look at potential demographic data that we would collect. A lot of thinking and intentionality needs to go into that. So we're really wanting to reflect that conversation that we've heard from council as a first step. The second piece is really to allow the regulatory changes to take root. I mean, I think the other thing that became the conversation around land use incentive grant is that we're uncertain as to how our investments are really paying off if we can perhaps do something instead with making sure our regulatory tools were in the right space. So again, having that work start seemed to really underscore the idea of allowing that to really help to create housing options using our regulatory tools. And then for me, once those two pieces fell into place, then we would have the right opportunity to look at land use incentive grant as it related to, you know, having that basis of regulatory opportunity and then allowing the land use incentive grant to really achieve premium, affordable housing. So I wanted to share that as a way to understand why we're electing this timeline that we've set forth.
So in my mind, I'm really hoping we will get to, in 2025, this kind of multi-family better tool system, whether it's an overlay or upzoning or height density or bonus, whatever it is, all the things. Is that kind of what you mean, that after that and after some anti-displacement work, we could look at Luigi coming back online? Okay. And then, because I didn't see any of that kind of multifamily work on our work plan either. I'm also on PED, so I know it will happen there, but we don't want it to also come to HCD, or we're comfortable with just PED?
And what we hope to share at the work session is that integration of where you're going to see, because we're in this work and the work that we do in community economic development, we are really focused on both the subsidy angle, right, with all of our investments that we make, as well as the programmatic angles, which is why you're seeing a lot of this work around the affordable housing waitlist or registry, as we're now calling it, as well as the home repair program and really how to expand that. So this is going to be our primary focus, but what we hope to show with the work session on next Tuesday is how we're knitting together the UDO changes as well. So we're kind of strategizing on doing kind of, the coupling of these items to produce the outcome and the goal that council wants to see.
And I'll say it again, I really feel like we can't have a whole conversation on all of our tools until we understand when the funding comes back online. If we've got like 5 Luigi out there that in 20 years, tax revenue comes back online, I want to know when. Like, I'm trying to figure out how to chart long-term planning, right? And I might just have to make it myself, I guess. I mean, if it's not something we want as a public document, but we have so many commitments to HTF and Luigi and other folks that didn't use any subsidies, but still said they'll have affordability in units for 20 years. I'm just trying to map how successful are all of these tools producing units and for how long, right? And I know we've got some semblance of that, but we haven't really said, like we should be targeting projects that will cover a 5-year gap in years 27 to 32 because we don't have anything, we can't formulate like that, which I think would be helpful to long-term planning. So I'll just share that again as maybe some tool we can layer in. The other thing that came on to mind is which group or committee, or is it all of council that will be talking about bonds and how they might be spent? Or like if I have a particular interest in a lot of the bonds being for home repair, anti-displacement, and down payment assistance, am I sharing that at our work session? Are we talking about that, or is staff bringing us recommendations on how to use the bond without any council input?
There will be some high-level discussion about that on Tuesday, but that November implementation of the affordable housing plan really is going to be a more targeted discussion. Correct me if I'm wrong, Nikki and Sasha, really around funding. And the reason that we waited until November is so that we would have some certainty around that affordable housing bond passing.
So we're just moving down the timeline, but we'll discuss it. Okay. That makes me feel more comfortable about it. Okay. Anything from you, Councilwoman Mosley? Okay. Anything else on this item before we wrap?
No, ideally we would have had the work session and then had this conversation. So I want to acknowledge that this is a little bit out of sync, and so appreciate your patience with us so that we didn't have to have the work session twice. And so if we miss anything coming out of the work session, we'll of course circle back with you all at our October meeting just to make sure there aren't any adjustments that need to be made based on feedback that we get next Tuesday from full council.
Okay. All right. Thank you for everyone that's listening along. We have concluded item number 4, and that leaves one item on our agenda, which is public comment. Katie, do we have anyone in the call or queue?
I will double check and reload. One moment. No, Madam Chair, we do not.
Okay. Thank you everyone for your attendance and assistance today. Wealth of information shared. It's been a great meeting, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. We are adjourned. Thank you.